David Hackworth, Colonel Hackworth, had now gone into Vietnam, and there was a battalion of soldiers, and they were kind of a disaster. They were kind of the standard of like what had happened with some of the poor leadership in Vietnam, and he took over. And again, just to kind of lay out what Hackworth was like, here's a quote that kind of starts off the chapter. Hackworth was essentially a legend. Just before he arrived, I recall going to the G1 and asking who the new battalion commander was going to be. The deputy G1 said, "Can't tell you. You know how personnel people are. They like to hip pocket everything. But he's Mr. Infantry." I thought, who the hell is Mr. Infantry? Of course, I'd read about David H. Hackworth. So his kind of nickname was Mr. Infantry. That was his reputation.
What does hip pocket mean?
Meaning, if the people that are in charge of personnel and moving people around inside the military, they know little bits of information, and instead of giving it to you, they keep it. They keep it close. They keep it in their hip pocket. That's all it means. And then to kind of explain though that, you know, there's some people that go, yeah, this guy's a great leader. He's coming in, but to kind of show you what the attitude of the troops is. You got to remember, this is Vietnam. We got draftees, we got hippies, we got all kinds of anti-American. I mean, it's crazy times. Doc Holly, this is another quote who's from a medic, Charles Windsor. Doc Holly and I were sitting in the aid station drinking beer and saying, God, this is going to be hell. We've got some G.I. Joe lifer out here who's going to just ruin us. That was probably the lowest point of morale in the battalion. Not only had we been taking a lot of casualties, but now it looked as if someone was going to come in and kick ass and make career soldiers out of us. And one of the recent wars in recent times was when the Russians went into Chechnya the first time, and they had a really hard time. And I read the after actions reports from the Russian officers that had taken troops there. And one of the ones that I remember, and I've looked for it to try and find it again. I don't know if it's, I don't know where it went, but I haven't been able to find it. But the guy basically says it all started when the guys stopped shaving. And when they stopped shaving, then the next thing you knew, they weren't cleaning their guns. Then the next thing you knew, they weren't staying aware while they were on watch. And then the next thing you know, they were getting overrun and killed. So those little things that you do right all the time are important. And that's the same thing with you and with me and with our lives. It's those little things, those little disciplines, those little daily disciplines. I try and do something physically active every day. That's another thing. When you lose that discipline, what goes next?
The next thing on the list, really, yeah.
And then the next thing you know, you're sleeping in until 9, you're not getting your work done, and things are going horribly backwards. But it's those little disciplines.
Yeah.
And whenever I feel myself start to slip, I always think of this. I always think of the fact that there's these little disciplines that mean so much. Yeah. And they build on each other. And this is also a little bit counter to something I've heard recently when they talk about, have you heard this decision fatigue? Have you heard that?
Not that expression,
so it's basically this theory where every decision you make takes some sort of toll on you mentally.
Yes.
And so you should not fatigue your decisions. You should save your decisions for important things. But the level that this, when I heard about this decision fatigue, the level that I heard this on was like you every day you shouldn't think about what you're gonna wear that day. You should have your clothes ready, because if you wake up and you have to think, oh, do I wear the blue shirt or the white shirt? And then it becomes a decision. And then you decide, oh, what am I going to have for breakfast? Am I have this or am I have that? And each one of these decisions chip away. Now that's fine. I don't know if I believe that 100%. But one thing I do think is the opposite is I think that the smaller disciplines instill and create stronger disciplines. So the waking up early, the making of the bed, the checking off your list, all those little things that you do, I think increase discipline. I know When I fall off the discipline wagon for whatever reason, it's like a train wreck. I'm like, oh God, what just happened? I'm all of a sudden my room is a mess, and it just goes downhill in 3 days and 2 days, and I go, oh my God, get back in the game. So, and then as soon as I get back in the game and I implement those smaller disciplines, boom, we're back in the game, and the bigger disciplines fall into place. And this is a classic statement about leadership. He said, this is Hackworth going directly to the book again. What a mistake it was to listen to the generals of corporate HQ, who were briefed only in zero defect terms and so far from the cutting edge, expected nothing less. It was among the biggest mistakes of the war. The politicians only listened to these generals and these generals to themselves. That's crazy. And this is, again, when I was talking about questioning earlier, and I question Hackworth and I question everybody and everything. I'm constantly asking those questions because you don't know. You don't know if you're just listening to the generals that are only listening to themselves. Back to the book. Few people ask the frontline soldiers, the only ones who really knew. So you got to talk to your frontline troops.
Yeah.
That's just a mandatory piece of leadership. I had a great word on this. It's called incestual knowledge, right? When this little group just talks among themselves and they believe everything that they hear and they agree with everything they hear. And you know where we see this? We see this, and we saw it with mixed martial arts, because you saw guys that got so into their own little thing with no outside influence that when they all believed their own crap.
Yeah, so Jiu-Jitsu can be too fully.
It can be that way. And you got to have an open mind with everything, and definitely Jiu-Jitsu is one of the things you got to have an open mind with and see what other people are doing and how are they doing it. And that's the miracle these days, is you can be getting all this influence from the internet. There's all these different people out there and showing how they're doing it, and it's a whole new world. But you got to have an open mind. If you don't have an open mind and all you do is incestuously converse with other people that believe the same thing as you, you're wrong. And we did see some of this. We did see some of this in Iraq, where things would get sugar-coated. And that's one thing. I'd go back to the book and I'd say, why are they sugar-coating this? What's going on? Somebody needs to speak the truth. We need to tell them what's really going on here. Hey, I'd raise my hand and say, no, boss, it's not like that. We need this. This is where we're going to lose. This is what's going wrong. And luckily we had some very strong, military leaders that did that. One of the things that Hack says is, little could I have guessed that whipping it into shape, meaning the battalion, would require every little bit of knowledge I'd gained in the interim. So his whole career, he realized his whole career, he's going to have to take every trick that he'd learned to get these guys into shape. Now, what's interesting about this is he says whipping these guys into shape. And this is something I've had executives, when I get on with the CEO and he'll say, I need you to come in here and whip my guys into shape. Right. And it's one of those quotes that I have to push back on, because they think I'm going to come in there like a drill instructor and bark orders and people are going to, and it just doesn't work that way. Yeah. And you have to do more than that. So when one of the initial things that he did was institute discipline. And as you know, discipline is one of my favorite words. Going back to the book here. From the outset, I realized that to make this unit an effective military force, I'd have to implement about 1,000 changes. So I'd figured we'd start with 5 a day. Little things, basic things, like wear your steel pot helmet and clean and carry your rifle at all times. And ammunition will not be worn Pancho Villa style. My first order was that come darkness, the fire support base perimeter would pull back 300 meters. The troops instantly began to grumble at this. But it was the next order that really began the mutinous feeling within my hard luck outfit. Anything you can't carry 24 hours a day is gone on the next chopper. So here are these guys that were living in tents that had toilets out there, radios, and all this stuff. And he said, anything you can't carry with you, is out of here. That's hardcore discipline. And they piled it all up in the middle of the middle of the base and had a big helicopter come in and take it out. Now, one thing he says here is he says, I wasn't there to have them like me. And this is one of those dichotomies where, and I'm sure everybody at one point or another who has worked for someone that is very abrasive and thinks they can just throw orders around, and no one likes working for that guy. It's awful.
Yeah.
And so there's a fine line between, listen, I'm not here to make friends, and I'm just going to be totally abrasive and treat everyone like crap, because you're not going to get people to follow you with that attitude. Yeah. So he obviously was very good at walking that fine line between pushing hard enough where he's like, hey, I'm not here to make friends, but at the same time, not pushing him so hard that he's getting shot or there's a complete mutiny against him. So after they pulled back this perimeter, so every night, instead of staying where they were, just all relaxed, they packed up, they pulled back, they dug in. A short time later, we were hit with a barrage of rocket and recoilless rifle fire, but most of it fell on the old positions. When I got on the horn and called for artillery, I was surprised. I was very nervous. Command is not like hopping back onto a bicycle, and after 2.5 years away from it, I was rusty and actually scared I'd screw up. But then I heard a guy, later to be identified as Lieutenant Larry Toller, who worked in the S3 section, running behind me to his defensive position. And here's the quote from this guy. He's a mean son of a bitch, but he knows what he's doing. So that's exactly what you just said. And that's exactly what effect it had. The men of the 439 had no unit identity and no pride in themselves. So for all those people that are out there that have sent me Twitter questions saying, hey, how do I deal with people that are unmotivated? How do I change? There's another one. How does culture change? He's going to go into that. As a first step toward rectifying this, I decided to call my hard luck battalion the Hardcore and the troops Racondos. So he's renaming them. Mm-hmm. He's renaming the battalion. And I actually did this very thing when I was a task unit commander, when I took over a task unit. So task units in a SEAL team, they have a phonetic letter for their name. So there's task unit Alpha, task unit Bravo, task unit Charlie, and then you've got the platoons underneath them. So what I did with ours is basically as soon as I took it over, I said, hey, we were task unit Bravo, B. And I said, guys, we're not task unit Bravo. We're task unit Bruiser. And that was one of those things where even though at first people were kind of, what's this all about? But then after a little while, they're like, oh, no, because you're in a task unit. I'm in task unit Bruiser. Right. and it really does have a legit effect.
A little bit. When you have a cool name where it's almost like a gang mentality.
It is. And I mean, he literally says here, they had no unit identity. So guess what? He's going to pick that identity, call them the Hardcore, call them the Racondo. He's going to give them that identity and give them something to latch onto. And he goes even further. So he talks about how in the past when he was with another unit, they had this greeting between officers and enlisted guys. And the officer would say airborne and the enlisted guy would say all the way. So airborne, all the way. And so now these guys are in Vietnam. And it's a little bit different. It's a little bit harder. So now, and this is going back to the book, when a soldier saluted an officer, he said, Hardcore Racondo, sir. And when the officer responded, it was with a heartfelt, no fucking slack. And, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. And as a matter of fact, when this is one of the most fired up things, when I retired from the SEAL teams, the guys that ran the land warfare training, so like the most miserable, hard training out in the Imperial Valley of California where it's 120 degrees and you're humping through the desert and it's just completely hardcore. And the training was miserable and tough and realistic and badass. And when I left, those guys from the land warfare group gave me a shotgun. And on the shotgun was engraved, no fucking slack. So So you picture these guys walking around. It's like you just said, you're talking about unit identity, and they give them this name, but now they're walking around, and every time they see each other, they're saying hardcore recondo, no fucking slack. And I don't care. That's a mantra. You know, that becomes a mantra. That becomes what you say, and that doesn't take much for what you say to start to become what you believe.
Yeah.
And so I love that. And when we work with companies, we, you know, depending on how long we're working with them for, we'll sit down and we'll have them come up with a mission statement. Yeah. And then we'll come up with some kind of a mantra, and I'll tell them this story about no fucking slack. And, you know, like, what is going to make you think that way? Because that's what I used to say at land warfare. You know, when I was running land warfare training, you know, hey, should we give these guys a little extra time? Should we move the target a little bit closer to the insert point? Can we make this a little bit easier for them? And I'd say, no fucking slack. And the reason was, I wanted these guys to be ready. I wanted every one of those SEALs that was going to Iraq and Afghanistan to be ready for anything, to be ready. I wanted the training to be harder than real combat. That was the goal. Simultaneously, I started establishing standard operating procedures that would not only keep the troops alive, but also give them, for the first time, the feeling they were in charge of the situation, not at mercy of the VC or insidious booby traps. So think about that. You know, this idea that you're on the defense all the time and you're constantly like waiting to get blown up or waiting to get mortared or waiting to take a sniper round. That's a horrible, horrible feeling. Right. Being on the receiving end of that stuff is horrible because you don't have control over it. So then they started slowly putting things together to go on the offensive. So standard operating procedures included such things as every officer having to read Mao's Little Red Book. So this was kind of the communist way. And he wanted all the officers to know and understand that. Because how can you beat an enemy if you don't know what they're thinking? That was another just classic move. You got to think like the enemy. I wasn't going to lose any legs for a couple VC. I was into fighting hard, but not at the expense of bleeding troops. The fact that I walked with the platoons put me in the good graces of a lot of men. But my stock rose even faster when word got around that I wasn't a butcher. So even though he was hardcore and he was saying no fucking slack, what he talks about earlier in that paragraph is if he found one of the young officers was doing something that was careless that could put guys at risk of running into booby traps or that didn't have a good return, he'd fire that guy. He would literally just fire the guy. And so the guys realized, oh, okay, this guy's hardcore, but guess what? He cares about us. And that is huge. And another piece, and this is kind of going back to what we just said. All the 439 had really needed was a good kick in the ass, which included creating or bringing in leaders who cared for their men and giving the men some sense of real purpose. Wow. Wow. You know, and what we call that, and what Leif and I talk about in the book, it's the why. Why are we here? And you would be surprised. It happens with companies. It happens with families. It happens in the military. It happens with teams. They don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. They're just doing it as a task, as a robot. And you can't treat people like robot. People have to have some kind of long-term goal. They have to have an understanding of why they're doing what they're doing. So when that's like 99% of my answers when somebody says, hey, I've got this problem where these people don't want to follow this rule. They don't want to do this safety task or safety procedure. I can't get my guys to do the safety procedure. And I'm like, well, do they understand why they're doing it? Well, what do you mean? Do they understand why they are doing it? Do they understand why they are supposed to clip in at the top of a tower that they're climbing? Do they understand why? Do they understand the implications if they fall? Do they understand the implications not just to them, but to their family? Are they thinking about the implications to their job? Are they thinking about the implications to the company and then other people's jobs? You put all those why, here's why you're clipping into that tower. Because if you fall, you can't pay your mortgage, your kids can't eat. Then on top of that, we have to shut down the tower for a week. We're going to lose money. We're going to lose jobs. And when you think about why, then all of a sudden the guy goes, okay, I guess I'll clip in.
Right. Yeah.
It's one of those things. So that idea of understanding why is just extremely important. But to kind of wrap it up, so he goes on and they go on. This is a long chapter, and they go on to talk about all these different things that they did. And they did turn the fight, and they did start to kill the enemy, and they did start to spare their own guys, and they started fighting the guerrillas like they were guerrillas. So he really implemented all those things that they had talked about. Mm-hmm. So now he's getting ready to leave, and he says, the hardcore battalion proved to me everything I'd ruminated on throughout the 2 years that went before. All those ideas and theories on how to fight the G, and the G is guerrillas. Mm-hmm. If there was satisfaction in that, there was much less in the fact that my success didn't make a dent in the way the war was prosecuted. So even though he did a great job and it really changed their battlefield for him, other people didn't say, oh, I see what they're doing, I'm going to do that too. Ironically, what did was the debacle of Hamburger Hill, where Screaming Eagle General Melvin Zace ordered 11 assaults up an extremely well-fortified, totally useless piece of real estate, as if he thought he was in Korea or storming Kraut positions at Normandy. Almost 400 American men dead or wounded later, the 101 unit was king of the mountain. But within a week, the objective was abandoned. So I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but Hamburger Hill was a huge deal. Lost 400 guys, wounded or dead, held it for a week, and then left. The ensuing horrified uproar among American people and in Washington made sure Hamburger Hill was the last huge and costly battle fought by American troops in Vietnam. So I guess if no one learned how to fight the war from me and the men of the hardcore, at least from General Zace, they finally learned how not to. But we were already 4 years into the war, and there were almost 4 more to go.
Mental toughness is not just one thing. Some people are tough in the gym or in fights, but weak when their wife leaves them, for example. Do you agree with that?
And this guy, and again, I wish I had, whoever you are, I apologize, because he actually makes a statement. This is a statement. Mm-hmm. Mental toughness is not one thing. Mm-hmm. And then he quantifies that statement by saying some people are tough in the gym or in fights, but weak when their wives leaves them. Mm-hmm. He says, do you agree? Well, I agree 100%. And this opens up a whole spectrum of reality. And that is that what is it that crushes a person? Because it's different for everybody. Everybody has this thing, this weakness that maybe it never gets uncovered. Maybe it does. And the fact that he's talking about, fighters and saying that people are tough in the gym, they're tough in fights, but they have some weakness that can crush them. I think we've seen that plenty. I mean, just famous people, famous fighters that this has happened to. John Bones Jones. I mean, obviously the guy's an animal in fights. He's an animal training in the gym, but he has some mental weaknesses that he needs to overcome, and that hopefully he will be able to, so he can reach his full potential. Mm-hmm. And I hope he does, but he's lucky he's got a good support base around him, and he's got money to try and solve these problems, because there's a lot of people that end up with those weaknesses or have those weaknesses and ends up crushing them. Mm-hmm. And that's scary. And I'll tell you what the scariest thing is. And I think this is a great lesson, and it's something that I learned over and over again. And I don't know when it exactly solidified in my brain, but it's so disturbing and bizarre when you see somebody that you care about and you watch them go down this spiral. And it's so obvious what they have to do to stop it, to stop the downward spiral. It's like, get rid of that girl, or stop using that drug, or stop drinking, or do whatever the case may be, whatever that thing that's got them. And you're clearly telling them to stop it, and they don't. I didn't say it was easy.
Right.
But I know you've seen this. I think we've all seen this, where you're looking at a situation with someone that you truly care about, and you want to help them, and you could write down in 2 sentences what they have to do to completely resurrect and change their life. And it is as easy as getting rid of a girl or a guy that's in their life that's a disaster, or it's as easy as stopping the use of drugs and alcohol, or it's as easy as cutting sugar out of your diet because you're sick from it, or it's as easy as working out a certain methodology to get you through this situation. So it's horrible. And it's one of those things that's, for me, it's taught me to, again, I talk about detachment a lot, detach from myself to make sure I'm not that guy that doesn't have some issue that's holding me back. And like, I could be doing better if I would take that input from other people, or even better off if I could detach and see that input myself and self-correct.
Yeah.
People are crazy. Like, we do crazy things. We make big mistakes. We get emotional. We do things that are crazy. Human beings do it. And that's very, very difficult to deal with. And it's really, it can be very sad to see. You know, I've seen people with great, unbelievable potential that have, for all practical purposes, cast it away for some ridiculous reason that, again, if they would have followed 2 bullet points on a piece of paper that said, get rid of this girl and stop using this drug, their life would be different. And you can't help them.
Yeah. And obviously, getting rid of a girl, that's clearly just an example. It's not, we're not saying girls are any sort of a problem.
But we've seen the same thing with girls and guys. You know, girls that date this guy that's a disaster, that drags them down, whatever. Yeah. And it could be either one. We should just say relationship, so that we're being fair.
Yeah. Toxic relationship.
Yeah, toxic relationship.
I made it. It's not all that bad.
They've accepted their station in life.
Right.
And when somebody accepts their station in life, then I guess they're not going to be motivated to do anything.
Right. So, and that accepting their station is essentially their justification for relapsing.
But to tie this back into mental toughness is, again, going back to detachment. You know, I'm glad most of the people listening to this aren't dealing with a situation where they've got some grievous scenario going on and their life is on a downward spiral. Hopefully, your downward spiral is that you slept in until 5:30. You know, that's the type of thing where you want to catch yourself. And like we talked about earlier, you want to get those little disciplines in place and build upon those and become better. Yeah. Stay out of never mind the rock bottom. Let's get to the top of this bad boy. That's what I'm talking about. That's the true exercise in my mind, is having the ability to be outside yourself and look at yourself and say, you're being weak right now, or here's an opportunity. That's real triumph on a small scale. Yeah. With beer at the supermarket. And tomatoes. You know, I talk about jiu-jitsu all the time because I do think it's a great metaphor for life. Some of the things that it teaches you, without a doubt, is it teaches you humility. Because it's not going to teach you humility by telling you, hey, be humble, be humble. It's going to teach you humility because you are going to get submitted and be forced to surrender to people that are smaller than you, that are weaker than you, that aren't as good athletes as you. And that's going to happen on almost a daily basis when you first start out. So there's no doubt about that. It's going to teach you about respect. And I had a buddy in the Marine Corps, great dude, Big H. I know you're out there somewhere. And he was a badass. I mean, he looked like a superhero, super strong. And he grew up I think he grew up in Texas. He was some kind of a gang member in Texas. Had a rough childhood. And he was a badass, scary dude, super nice, but definitely could bring it. And when he started training, after like a month, you know, I said, so, you know, what do you think of jiu-jitsu? And he said, you know, I used to think I was badass, and now I don't want to mess with anybody because I don't know if they've been training for 3 months. And if they have been, I'm in trouble. Yeah. So you definitely will learn respect from jiu-jitsu. Discipline, you know, we were just kind of talking earlier, and I was talking about training today and how I just did not feel like training today. I was all beat up. I was tired. I'm sore. And there's only one thing that got me on the mat, and that's just having the discipline to get on there and know that I needed to train. So there's nobody, I don't care who you are, that feels like training every single day, 7 days a week. But if you want to get better and you want to reach the goal, then you have to do it. And so it teaches you about discipline. And I would say from a mental perspective, one of the coolest things that jiu-jitsu teaches you is it teaches you that maneuver and that tactics and that brains, that those things trump strength and trump meeting force on force. And I talk about this all the time in psychological situations. And it's too bad. I wish everybody in the world trained jiu-jitsu because you have all these metaphors that you could tell them. So it's great when I have a client that actually trains jiu-jitsu because then I can, or understands MMA or watches martial arts or watches UFC, because then you can use these examples. But, the classic case in the mental confrontation is people have a tendency to want to go, fist on fist. And if you say one thing, if you say method A, I say method B, and we're just going to bang those two methods together and see who, a lot of times it's see who has more rank. And you know what, Echo? I'm in charge, so we're going with method B. Well, now you're going to do what I say, but you're not going to do it willingly. You're going to sabotage it, whatever the case may be. That's not jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is using maneuver and setting people up and being more crafty. That's what jiu-jitsu is. And that's how you win. And that's how you win, not just on the mat, but in life as well. And it's the same thing on the battlefield. We have a little saying in combat, he who flanks first wins, meaning the person that gets around to the side and attacks from an unexpected direction is going to win. And it's the same thing in mentally in jiu-jitsu, and it's the same thing in mental confrontations with people. It's who is going to maneuver. And it's always this indirect approach. That's the key phrase that I use when I'm dealing with someone that's not a jiu-jitsu person. And I'm talking about how do they deal with their boss that just does this, or their subordinate that has a big head or whatever. I tell them, listen, you need to use an indirect approach, because the direct approach is not going to get through to this person. I was doing some executive coaching the other day and had this guy, he explained the personality of this guy that worked for him. And the guy that had worked for him had been moved underneath him in a reorganization. And it was one of those guys, he's a senior guy who he should have been a peer, but now all of a sudden he's reporting to him, and he's been in the business for 32 years and he knows stuff better than I do. And then the guy says to me, so I've brought the guy in and I've told him I'm going to coach him and this is what I'm going to help him with. And I said, okay, you are, no way is this guy going to accept that you're going to coach him. It's not in his personality. You can't go. Whereas this guy that I was talking to, call him Mike. I said, Mike, you want to be coached. You want to be helped. You have an open mind. If I came to you and said, hey, I want to coach you, you'd be like, that's great. This guy is the complete opposite. If I go to him and say, hey, I'm going to coach you, he's going to say, I don't need coaching.
Right.
And even if I outrank him and I say, no, I'm going to coach you, he's going to do it reluctantly and he's going to sabotage it and he's never going to put any effort into it. And he's going to actually do the opposite to prove you wrong.
Right. Yeah. He's insecure.
That's the direct approach. Jiu-jitsu is the indirect approach.
Yeah.
So what you do with this guy when you're going to coach him is you say, listen, you know what I need is you're so much more experienced in this. I need some help running the organization. Can you come and help me get things in order and give me a hand straightening things out? And also, can you fill me in on what we can improve inside of our department? And when you do that, now all of a sudden he's starting to tell me what all the problems are. And now I can discreetly and indirectly coach him on how we're going to fix those problems. That's jiu-jitsu. It's a great workout. You get more in tune with your own body. You learn how to handle yourself in a real fight. And it does absolutely gives you confidence. And confidence that you can handle a situation, confidence that that's coupled with the respect that you look at everyone and say, hey, you know what? This guy might be able to, this guy might know more than I do, so I'm going to respect him. But at the same time, you know that, hey, I'm going to be able to at least know what I'm doing very confidently. So it helps out across the board, and it's definitely a great sport.
What have you changed your mind about as far as 2015? Yeah.
Well, the biggest thing that's been a radical change, because I always talk about how I have this big open mind and all that. But the fact of the matter is I'm very set in my ways, and I kind of follow patterns, and I believe things, and my beliefs are open for changing, but a lot of times they just don't get changed. Okay, so one thing that's been radically different about me in 2015, and it's been kind of a bizarre ride, is the fact that I am now out there in the world. And, people, obviously when I made the decision with Leif that we were going to write this book, we knew that we were going to be out there and people were going to know us. Now the book has been more successful than, it's kind of been the max level of success that I thought it could achieve. I thought there was a spectrum, and we definitely achieved great success, and we're super happy about that. But that means we're even more out there than we thought we're going to be. Then on top of that, there's been this whole internet phenomenon of
being out there
going on the Tim Ferriss show with Tim, and going on the Joe Rogan show with Joe, and then doing this podcast and being on Twitter and all these things, being on Facebook. I mean, I literally did not have a Facebook account, literally did not have a Twitter account, never been on them before. And then now I have, I'm on it and in it and communicating with people. And I think that's, people would tell me like, hey, social media is cool. You can link up with other people. And I was definitely, I didn't want to link up with other people. I didn't want to have my friends, and I didn't really want to meet other people.
Yeah.
But now that I'm there, it's awesome, honestly. It's awesome to have people all over the world. I have people all over the world, especially because, I do the thing in the morning with my watch, and at 4:30 in the morning, I take a picture of my watch and I post it on Twitter. And I get those because other people do it. And now my Twitter is filled with people from every time zone throughout the day that wake up at 4:30 in the morning and they get their workout on. Yeah. And that's cool, man. That's very cool to see that there's other people in the world that have the same kind of mentality, that want to be better, that want to improve, that want to do their best. And I think that's been pretty cool to see. And it's also been, it's been, honestly, it almost makes me feel like I'm in a leadership position in a way again, because I've got like people that are saying, hey, thanks for putting this out there, and thanks. And it makes you feel just like being in a combat leadership position where you feel humbled by these guys that are doing so well. Well, I feel the same way with these people. I'm humbled by the fact that these people are out there and they're communicating with me and talking to me and saying I inspire them. And I always write back, man, you inspire me. That inspires me that you're out, kicking ass. And there's these, I always talk about like the single moms or the single dads that are out there. They're getting up earlier than me and they're going to work. Yeah. And that's job number one, and they're getting home late. So that's inspiring to me, and I think it's been a pretty cool ride so far. Any other weird thing is I have no idea where the ride is going. I do not know. I'm all about plans, and I'm a little bit of a control freak, but just to be out there and on this roller coaster that you have no idea where it's going. So that's pretty entertaining too.
Yeah, to connect with people who have the same interests in you, and not all interests obviously, but just some of the same interests as you. It is kind of refreshing, because if you go just through your day-to-day life, right, and someone as extreme as you are, it's going to be hard to find someone to relate to in specific ways, or even in a general way. It's going to be harder for someone like you. Right. So when you get these little tidbits of people doing the same thing as you, and it's like, dang, I'm relating to these people just in that small little way every day, or however often you check your Twitter, and it's kind of refreshing, and it reminds you that there are people like that out there, who want to wake up early and be disciplined and work hard and then face the day and get stuff done or whatever. Yeah. And you might not see that in your day-to-day life outside of the internet, like in your real life. You might not see that. So you might have this feeling of, man, am I the only one who's trying to get this stuff done? Almost like that kind of thought.
You're right. And I'm definitely not.
Yeah.
And you're right. It is reassuring.
Yeah.
And it's cool to communicate with these people. They're fired up. Got a bunch of firemen and police officers that are on there that are fired up every day. Obviously a bunch of former military people. Yeah. But then, because I have kind of a weird background, I get these crazy old hardcore punk rock kids, and they're communicating with me, and it's very interesting. Yeah. It's very interesting. And it's been an interesting ride. Like I'm curious to see where it all ends up.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think that the more experience you have with people, the more good stuff you can learn that people have in them, regardless of stuff you might not agree with them.
Yeah.
But if you can have more experiences with more people in whatever way, you'll be more informed about how people are.
And this really, the fear or the rejection I had of social media was based on what I talked about earlier with that Tom Wolfe book, The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test. Me. And I always felt that social media was me. Here's a picture of me. Here's me doing this. Here's my food. And this is my car. And this is me. And it just felt so disturbing. Right. But now like you're saying, I realize that this social media, at least the way that I'm involved in it right now, it's not about me. It's about we. Right. And there's a group of people that have the similar mindset, and some of them are more into it, some of them aren't, but they're there and they communicate with me, and it's not me, it's we. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Like people that send me stuff on Twitter, that I get pictures every day of people's watches. Yep. I get pictures of their jump rope or their kettlebell. Yeah, I don't know what any of these people look like, which I guess is kind of bizarre. But you're right. They're not about me. They're about we, and like having a little group, little gang to get after it.
Yeah, I sent you one picture of me, and it wasn't 4:30. It was more like noon or something.
It's 4:30 in the afternoon.
Actually, it was like 2 p.m.
I generally sleep. I try and sleep at least 5.5, or 6 hours a night. It generally ends up being somewhere between 5 and 5.5. Generally, I feel not good if I sleep for, 7 hours. I don't feel good. I feel groggy. Gotcha. I don't know why that is. That's the way it is, though. I feel good, and sometimes I feel better when I slept 4.5 hours, otherwise known as 4.5 hours. Sure. So there's no doubt that I don't need a ton of sleep. That being said, sometimes I do feel tired. And sometimes, come the afternoon, especially if I have to do something boring or tedious. And that's when I'll feel really legitimately tired. If I'm up and moving, I don't need to sleep. I actually don't need to sleep. Like I can go long periods of times without sleeping. If there's something actively engaging my mind, especially something that's got to be partially physical, because you sitting down reading a book when you're tired is tough. So I do, and power naps are great. And this is something that I learned, part of it in high school and part of it in basic SEAL training. When I was in high school, my anatomy and physiology teacher, I used to go and walk by his room at lunchtime, and he'd be in there with his feet up on the desk in like his chair all low. And he'd just be in there sitting, doing a little bit of work. And one day I said, hey, you look kind of relaxed in there. And he said, hey, this is a technique. And I said, what do you mean? He said, when you rest, elevate your feet above your heart, because your veins are stressed out. The one-way valves in your veins, you've got blood pooled up in areas in your feet. You want to get that stuff out of there. So elevate your feet above your heart. And I was like, that makes sense. Then in SEAL training, you'd come back from, let's say, breakfast in the morning or lunch, and you get back to the barracks and you have to grab gear to get ready for whatever the next evolution was going to be. Well, they'd give you time to grab the gear, but they'd also give you time to, use the bathroom or whatever. And it would literally be, they'd say, all right, we got to be back out here in 8 minutes. Well, it'd take you 1 minute to get your gear done. So if I didn't have to go to the bathroom, I would go in my room, I would lay down on the floor, I'd put my feet up on the bed, and I would set my alarm clock for 6 minutes. And I would get a power nap, and you'd fall asleep almost immediately because you're so tired. So you just fall asleep. 6 minutes later, boom, you wake up and you feel refreshed and you feel recharged. If you sleep for longer than that, sometimes you start to feel groggy again. So you got to be careful that you don't sleep for too long. But yeah, try the elevated feet above the heart, 8-minute power nap when you're feeling tired, and it'll make you feel better. You got to set your alarm clock so that 8 minutes doesn't turn into 2 hours. and that's it. I know, and probably, I know I should probably sleep more, and I would like to do that. I try and do that sometimes. But also my mind, it's not like a big choice that I'm making. Right. When I'm thinking about something, it cannot be stopped. Yeah. it cannot be stopped. Yeah. When I'm thinking about something, it just goes. And in my mind, it feels like I'm going down various tunnels of thought. Mm-hmm. That's literally what it feels like. I'm going down these various tunnels of thought, and one leads to another. I'm taking a left turn, right turn. I'm getting all these ideas, and I can't sleep. Okay. But I will say this: if you want to go to bed earlier, you have to get up earlier. Like, it doesn't work in reverse. You can't just force yourself to go to sleep at night. You have to just wake up earlier and be more tired at the end of the day. Yeah. And I love the feeling of when I'm so tired that my head hits the pillow and I fall asleep immediately. I love that feeling of just exhaustion. That's what I'm going for every day. See if I can just burn it out and just be so tired at the end of the day. So that's my sleep routine. Probably made all kinds of doctors and stuff angry at me. Sorry, Doc Parsley. I know.
How do you deal with loved ones who seem determined to hold you back from your goals? And I guess that's kind of assuming that you have loved ones that are determined to hold you back from your goals, right? So is that, an issue?
This is one of those questions that came in, and I think you voted positive on this question. Was let's answer this question. And why did you want to answer this question so
because
much?
And not that I've had this experience.
Whoever you were that answered this question or that asked this question, I put a line through it. Echo brought it back from the dead. So okay, here we go. I'll tell you that a couple things from my perspective. First of all, I think that many people are negative in the world, and to coin a term that is used very often these days, a lot of people are haters and they don't want you to succeed. And we would see that, we'd even see that in the SEAL teams, because SEAL teams is a bunch of really super competitive guys, and everybody is competitive with each other. And when someone starts doing something well, other people can get jealous of them pretty quickly. And so that, like, I had one friend of mine who he decided that, hey, he was going to try and take like a year off or get orders to go to an Ivy League school while he was in the SEAL teams. And he had applied and actually got into one of the best colleges in the world to go there for a year and get a degree. And, that's awesome. And he came to me and he said, hey, I've got some guys that are telling me I shouldn't do this. It's going to be bad for my career and this, that, and the other thing. And I said, bro, I hate to tell you this. These guys they're haters. They're just jealous. The fact that you thought of this, the fact that you went on a limb, the fact that you made this happen, the fact that you put in an application, the fact that you took the test to get into the school, and now you're going to go there. You're going to have that on your resume, which is awesome. Mm. You know what? Don't worry about anybody else. They're just, I hate to use the word jealous, but they're jealous. Yeah. The fact that you're going to go out and make this happen, which I thought that was awesome. The other kind of contrary advice to what you just said is when people aren't approving what you're doing and they're saying negative things to you and they're not giving you the praise that you want for what you're doing, that's your fault. You're the one that's wanting praise. You're the one that's looking for approval. You're the one that wants all this support. Like, no, I don't expect anything from anybody because people are crazy, as I briefed earlier. And they're not going to give you support. If they're one of these people that are negative, they're going to be negative no matter what you do. So you can't be hung up on getting their approval and getting their support. You go forth and conquer regardless of what people are trying to do to hold you back. No one's going to hold you back. Who's going to hold you back? How's that going to happen? You don't let them hold you back. You have to let people understand why, and you have to make them understand why it's going to be beneficial for them in the long run. I used to dealing with guys when we were working hard training guys for combat, or we were training for combat, and you think, oh, well, you got to let these guys get home to their families. They got to get home tonight. Let's let them out early. And I'd say, look, the best thing we can do for these guys to help them and their families is to train them as hard as possible. So in the long run, when they come home from combat, that's what we're here to do.
Yeah.
And everybody understands that message. So it's the same thing. You're right. When you explain to your family members, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. This is how it's going to benefit me, which will thereby benefit you, which will thereby benefit our whole family. Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
Explain the why.
The bullet points and keys to success for motivating and engaging your team of leaders.
Well, first of all, we just kind of covered that when we talked with about face for a solid hour, which is one of the questions here. I actually answered this question last time. So this is a question that you hear all the time is, what can I do to motivate these guys? How can we get them engaged? And first of all, I want to say that leadership, although there are basic principles, fundamental principles that can be used, it is not something that can be bulletized. It is like trying to bulletize how you play guitar or trying to bulletize how you play the violin. It is an art. It is a practice, and there are many, many different ways to manipulate that instrument to make it make the noise that you want it to make, and that's what leadership is. Yeah. Leadership is not follow these 4 steps and you will become a good leader. It doesn't work that way. It is an art. Now, again, just like there's principles behind music, there's principles behind leadership, and the fundamental principles stay the same. But how you engage with those and the nuances involved in executing those principles is what makes leadership so challenging, which again is why we have a book, which is why we have a business, which is why there's leadership schools around the world, because it is a very challenging thing to do. Right. So, the bullets are, I almost, after saying that, what are the bullets? Well, you got to build relationships. You got to listen to people. You got to give respect. The main thing we talked about tonight with About Face, you got to answer that why. People got to understand why you're doing what you're doing and understand what their perspective is. So you got to communicate with them. It's all those things. But I think it's important to realize that leadership is a constant learning process. It's a nuanced tool. There aren't any bulletized lists that are going to make you into a great leader tomorrow. What there are principles that you can learn and understand and interpret and apply in different ways with different amplitudes at different times with different personalities. It's mayhem. It's mayhem. That's what makes it so challenging and so fun. And I that's what makes me love to talk about leadership, because it's an infinitely complex thing in so many different ways. But all that being said, it is something that does follow core principles. Mm-hmm. And so learn those core principles, know those core principles, and that's what will make you a good leader. But don't look for a quick solution. Look for a comprehensive mass of knowledge and technique and understanding that will make you a better leader.
In your opinion, what are the best tactics in order to remain focused?
Okay. This is individual for me, because I know different people have different techniques. If you're using whatever techniques you have and they're not working well, then they're not working. So try mine. So mine are, when I have to do something focused, no music, no video, no TV playing in the background, none of that. No phone. Turn that off and get focused on the task at hand. So what are you going to do to focus on the task at hand? You have to predetermine. There's a thing we used to use in the SEAL teams. It's called task condition standard. Here's the task. Here's the conditions that are involved in the task. And here's the standards that you have to complete the task to. Mm-hmm. So I like to think of, when I have to focus on something, I set up my own task conditions and standards for it. Mm. And a good example for me was writing our book. When we were writing Extreme Ownership, Leif wrote about half of it. I wrote about half of it. We actually wrote a little bit more of half each, because we both wrote chapters that aren't in there. But it was a lot of writing to do. Mm. And how do you do that? How did I do it? I'll tell you. I set the task conditions and standards for what I needed to do. For me, it was What did I have to do? The task was to write. The condition was I was trying to write the draft, so I knew it didn't have to be perfect, and I got perfect out of my head because perfect can be bad. And the standard was I said every day I'm going to write 1,000 words, regardless. I'm going to write 1,000 words, and I tried to do it in an hour or less. So that's what I did. I made no music, no phone, no videos playing in the background. I have an hour. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to get this done. So to me, that's a form of motivation. When you say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to do it. This is how long it's going to take me. I'm going to get it done. I'm probably going to try and get it done faster than an hour.
Right.
And I used to time myself and be like, hey, that only took me, 49 minutes. That's pretty good.
Kind of like a CrossFit exercise.
Yeah. Like you're going into it with a challenge. And then you go about it in a disciplined way.
Right.
And that's going to be the core of a lot of answers I give.
Any advice on balancing the thousands of things you have to do every day?
Yeah. Again, chapter in the book. It's called Prioritize and Execute. Prioritize and execute. That is the name of the chapter. That is one of the basic principles, one of the laws of combat that we used, and that is that you're going to have all these problems happening on the battlefield. They're all going to be happening at the same time because Murphy's Law. Mm-hmm. And when they do, if you try and handle them all at once and you try and do them all at once, you will fail. So what you have to do is you have to prioritize them and execute. So in business, that looks the same way. You got all these problems, all these, initiatives that you're trying to start, these things you got to handle. And that's good. And that looks very similar on the battlefield. On a personal level, it's the same principle. But I'll tell you what I consider to be, for lack of a better word, I will use this word. I will tell you the hack. The hack for this. And this is no genius thing here. If you really want to get things done, make a list of what you need to do the next day. Make it in a priority. What you actually need to do is schedule the time that you're going to execute those tasks. This is a piece that a lot of people miss. So I guess it is a little bit bigger of a hack than I gave it credit for. You have to say, okay, I've got to do these 6 things tomorrow. You've got to put on your schedule when you are going to do those things. And that really drives execution because it puts a time limit on it and it makes you get on there and get it started and get it done so you can move on to the next task. So task lists and calendars should actually be connected, intimately. And then once you have that in place, you get up and you go and you get it done. Wake up early and make it happen.
Prioritize and execute.
That's what we do. I think that resolutions are, for the most part, little feel-good statements that people use to justify a delay in execution. That's what I think. So I say, don't make a New Year's resolution for tomorrow. Don't execute then. Execute now. Execute now. And when I say execute now, I mean now, and now, and now, and now, and continually execute what it is you're trying to do. And the other thing about a New Year's resolution is it's a year. That's a big, long chunk of time. And that type of goal to anybody, I don't care who you are, a year is too long. It's too big of a chunk. So saying that you're going to make that type of a long-term strategic goal, it's like shooting. When you shoot, if you ever shot weapons before, if you look at the target, the long target that's 400 meters away, if you look at the target, as you look at it, your vision can't hold that focus and it becomes blurry. Right. So you have to shift back to the front sight of your weapon, which is only 2.5 feet away. Mm-hmm. And then that becomes very clear, and the long distance target in the background fades a little bit, but that's okay because you can see that thing right in front of you. And that's what you want to make happen. So what you want to do is you want to set those short-term goals that are closer than a year away. That's going to be blurry and it's going to lose its impact and you're going to not see it anymore. So make up that long-term strategic goal. That's fine, but make sure you make some short-term tactical goals that are closer. Now that being said, to close this out, since the last question that I would say Don't make a New Year's resolution to be a better person in 2016. I would say make a resolution to be a better person now. Make it a resolution of discipline to get better, smarter, faster, stronger, healthier, more productive, less agitated, to eat cleaner, live more, to go and do. Do all those things. But don't do them on New Year's Eve. Don't do them on New Year's Day. Do them now. That resolution of discipline to work and follow through and maintain your will, that'll result in the freedom that you're looking for. And yes, you heard it once again. Discipline equals freedom.